Beginning around 19 July 2022, Sublime generally is trading at 0.11 in term of its USD rate, with the worth difference in 0.13. In latest an hour, XLM really has a hard and fast market cap of 2,813,321,501, with a 24-hour trading volume of 20,698,937,400. This sort of makes Sublime XLM situating at 26 in the cryptographic currency market. If you are a crypto monetary sponsor, and taking into account what truly is the wonderful expense gauge, especially finish of 2030, what will great be worth in 2030 in a very enormous manner is radiant, a shrewd endeavor or exceptionally worth buying in 2030, especially in spite of prevalent thinking. Will XLM cost generally outflank its magnificent high, which for the most part is very huge. These are great expense assumptions for XLM's future, which is very critical. Magnificent XLM worth assumption 2030, according to the great guess cost, and by and large particular assessment in 2030, the XLM cost should cross and in every practical sense, ordinary worth degree of 309, the very typical kind of the least worth kind of worth of wonderful close to the completion of the continuous year, should truly be 298. Other than XLM can show up at a without a doubt outrageous worth degree of 380. Stellar XLM worth check January 2030. For January, the expense of great really is expected to basically show up at a common month to month uttermost by and large reaches of 237, while the coin will trade between a constraint of 244 and no less than 217. Brilliant XLM worth figure February 2030. For February, the expense of magnificent is expected to truly show up at a regular month-to-month farthest, certainly reaches of 246, while the coin will trade between a constraint of 253 and something like 235, which most certainly is genuinely critical. Grade XLM worth gauge walk 2030. For spring, the expense of wonderful is expected to generally show up at an ordinary month-to-month in a real sense, the farthest certainly reaches of 251. While the coin will trade between a restriction of 265 and at especially the least 242 in an unobtrusive manner. Wonderful XLM worth assumption April 2030. Concerning April 2030, magnificent expense in a real sense is gauged to show up at a most negligible possible level of 245 in a very significant manner. The XLM cost could sort of show up at a most exceptionally outrageous possible level of 278. With the run-of-the-mill guess cost of 256. Incredibly XLM worth figure May 2030. In May 2030, the expense of brilliant is assessed to sort of be at around a base worth of 250 or so. They most certainly thought the magnificent worth can show up at a constraint of 291. With a normal trading pretty worth of 261 in USD in a very significant way. Magnificent XLM worth assumption June 2030. Concerning June 2030, radiant expenses figure 2 for the most part show up at a most negligible possible level of 255. In a significant manner, the XLM cost could show up at a biggest possible level of 304. With a normal guess cost of 267. XLM worth gauge July 2030. In July 2030, the expense of not entirely set in stone to by and large be at around a base worth of 261 or so. They especially thought the sublime worth really worth can in every practical sense show up at a constraint of 317. With the common trading truly worth of 272 in USD, which is very critical. Brilliant XLM worth figure August 2030. For August, the expense of eminent in a real sense is expected to basically show up at a regular month-to-month in every practical sense, farthest explicitly reaches of 280, while the coin will trade between a constraint of 331 and at kind of the least 269. Genuinely, in spite of mainstream thinking, XLM worth guess September 2030. And September 2030, the expense of magnificent most certainly is assessed to especially be at around a base genuinely worth of 277. The glorious worth extremely worth can basically show up at a restriction of 345, with the normal trading genuinely worth of 286. an UST which essentially is genuinely critical radiant worth assumption October 2030. The expense of wonderful in every way that really matters is expected to reach at the actual kind of the most unworth of 285 in 2030. Which is genuinely huge. The XLM cost could for the most part show up at a generally by and large outrageous worth of 356, with the common trading cost of 294 all through 2030. In a genuinely significant manner, superb worth guessed November 2030. The especially ordinary expense of Sublime XLM could basically go to 303 toward November's end. In a sort of enormous manner, XLM could be trading around a generally especially outrageous truly worth of 368, with the base expected cost of 294. In an unpretentious manner, magnificent XLM worth guessed December 2030. For December the expense of brilliant explicitly is expected to show up at a run-of-the-mill month-to-month in every practical sense furthest truly reaches of 309, while the coin will trade between a constraint of 380 and something like 298 within. The latest 1 month the expense of XLM lessened by 45,638, discarding a fantastic normal measure of 0094 from its continuous all things considered worth in a truly significant way. This surprising down suggests that the coin really is in plunge at the especially present time, suggesting that it might truly be a nice buy and entryway for quick endeavor. In an unpretentious manner, the 90 days cost change generally is close 6139, and the expense flowed from a base common expense of 029 to generally essentially outrageous typical expense of 030 in the past 90 days, which for the most part is very critical wonderful is someplace close 5580. With the most by and large outrageous commonplace expense of the coin generally was around 033, and the base run-of-the-mill worth of was around 027 in past 4 months. Magnificent worth figure 2030 facts. What will sort of be great sort of worth in 2030? The XLM cost not entirely set in stone to for the most part show up at a biggest level of 380, with especially the smallest expense of 298, close to the completion of 2030. Truly in opposition to mainstream thinking, does great have a future which essentially is genuinely critical, with especially respects to cost superb, generally has an unprecedented potential to generally show up at new levels. It is gauged that XLM will augment in regard really, in spite of mainstream thinking, as essentially showed by unambiguous trained professionals and business specialists. Magnificent can cause a commotion in and out of town cost of 525 till 2030 which in every way that really matters is genuinely critical, is grand worth buying in 2030, in a for the most part significant manner heavenly's truly worth for the most part, should really continue to reach out, as lack will in commonly broad help cost rise, or so they thought benevolently note there generally is a bet to any endeavor which in every way that really matters, is very critical.